will Roma get much better as a result of sacking Mourinho right now between now and the end of the season? I'm not so sure.
It was a unique tactic and it looks like it's massively backfired. Hello and welcome back to the first ever episode of Tuesday Vibes. Yes, I'm afraid we couldn't bring you Monday Vibes yesterday because I was chucking my guts up all morning. That was disgusting imagery to start the show. But anyway, I was a bit ill. It was like a 24-hour sickness bug. I feel much, much better today. And all the better for being joined by Mikey McCubbin. How are you, McCubbs?
I'm good, thanks, Dukes.
Early start this morning?
Early start on Sky Sports News, yeah. There are a few bits of breaking news, one of which we're going to discuss today. But yeah, all good, thanks. Good to have you back in the building, fighting fit.
Yes, just about.
Although who knows, maybe I'll pick up this bug from you.
Yeah, I do feel a bit bad.
Tomorrow,
I maybe should have got some of the plaster screens.
Yeah,
like
bring the COVID regulations back in. You know what I mean?
Masked up.
Yeah, get you in a hazmat suit. But yeah, all good, thanks, Dukes. All
nice.
Good.
Well,
Can't
one
complain.
man with a lot of time on his hands too now is Jose Mourinho, because we had the news breaking this morning that he has been fired by Roma. He was out of contract there at the end of the season, so they've jumped the gun slightly and decided to pay him off for the final 5 months of his contract or so. McCubb's immediate reaction to this, is this surprising? Did you see this coming? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it seemed to have been greeted with a bit of inevitability by a lot of people, but I don't know whether, I feel like Mourinho has survived a few scares at Roma, and yeah, given that his contract was up at the end of the year, given that there was no real outstanding candidates, of course Daniel De Rossi has now been all but confirmed as his replacement, at least on an interim basis. Yeah, I was maybe somewhat, because, I don't know, I think the thing is with Mourinho, he was really loved by the fans, but even then, they were booed off on Sunday. Was it Sunday or Saturday when they lost to Milan 3-1? Yeah, great game, but ultimately, was it a fourth loss in 6 games for the Giallo Rossi? Obviously lost in the Coppa Italia against Lazio as well, and that kind of underlined what has been, some pretty bad form actually from Mourinho in the Derby della Capitale. Only one win in 6 against Lazio since taking the Roma job back in 2021. So I think things like that counted against him. The injury problems that his Roma team have suffered this season, I guess are a mitigating factor as well. But 5 points off the top 4 in January, that is salvageable, isn't it? I think that, Serie A is not as strong this season as it has been in years past. It's only really Inter and then Juve kind of chasing them down, who are the real kind of the really strong teams. So, yeah, I think there would have been faith there. But at the same time, this is Mourinho's 3rd season in charge. This is the third season. Yeah, exactly. 3rd season syndrome. It is also the 3rd season in which his Roma team have not looked really anywhere near title worthy, and have also looked shaky in terms of their top 4 ambitions. And after the money that was spent, especially in the first year of his reign, I do see why the Friedkins have come to this decision. In some ways, maybe it would have been better to have, maybe tried to start with a clean slate before this season. But I don't know. I think it's a mixed one. I think, you look back at his Roma career and it's like he did attract some great players to the club, especially those who he got in on frees. There were some great moments. Obviously, the Conference League, winning the Conference League, which I think was their first European title in how many years?
First trophy full stop in 14.
First trophy, yeah, in 14. And then obviously got them to the Europa League final as well. There have been some really good moments under Mourinho. And it's a shame that, Tammy Abraham dropped off a bit last year and then picked up that injury last May, which, he's not even back till March. He has had to contend with some things, but at the same time, you have the kind of general bad blood that he brings, the amounts of sendings off from his coaching staff,
29,
crazy
in 2.5 years between him and his coaching staff.
That's mad. And that, things like that just they're not particularly sustainable. And I know it's Roma, and I know it's like the fans always backed him, and But that can lead to a bit of a toxic environment. When you've got the fans taking lead from Mourinho and abusing referees, then it's a bit like, is this really the image that we want at the club? But yeah, I think I'm not overly surprised that it ran its course in the end. But will Roma get much better as a result of sacking Mourinho right now, between now and the end of the season? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, looking at their immediate concerns, Husamawa, Evan and Dicker are at AFCON. Dybala, Smalling are out for a few more weeks, I think. At least in the case of Smalling, Tammy Abraham's out until the end of February, I believe. So there are a few issues for him to contend with. But I think you're right to point out that you can almost divide it into European exploits and league form.
Yeah.
And like they are just polar opposite. They had that, I think it's a knockout tie in the Europa League coming up next month against Feyenoord, which I think is the third season in a row in which they played Feyenoord. Anyway, you probably back Roma to, have a very decent chance of beating Feyenoord over a two-legged tie. But the form in the league, just not good enough. And as you say, he will point to the fact he wasn't backed financially in his final 2 years. But then he also wasted £100 million worth of, not wasted is a strong word, because Tammy Abraham was about a third of that. And he actually proved to be excellent in that first year. What did he score? 27 goals and won the Conference League. But Shomorodov, Vinya, Marash Kumbula, Brian Reynolds, Rui Patricio. Rui Patricio is still at the club, but the previous four I just mentioned aren't even at the club this year. They're on loan or being sold permanently. So I think there has been a huge amount of waste there. And Mourinho has been a bit sort of down, not almost on himself, but on the situation. He said he's not Harry Potter last week after they lost to Lazio. Basically saying that my reputation has raised expectations here, but they've only signed one player for a permanent fee in the last 2 years, and that was Zeki Celik. And other than that, it's been loans, it's been free transfers. They've had to be quite clever, but that is partly Mourinho's fault, as I've just listed. Like, they wasted a lot of talent. They didn't even get particularly close to challenging for the top four in either of his 2 full seasons, and a 9th this year. So I don't know. It's not as bad as it was at Spurs United, but it's not been great either, is how I describe it.
And I think probably it's not as bad as it was at Spurs United, probably because the expectations were probably a little bit lower. I don't know, actually, in Serie A. It's so competitive that I think if Mourinho really had made, if he'd made some, more serious progress in his first year, I know, obviously, got that European, the UEFA Conference League, sorry. If he'd made more domestic progress in that first year, then maybe Roma would have been in a position. I think they still have the third highest wage bill, don't they, in the league? And if you have one of the highest wage bills, you should be gunning for the Champions League. And I think this might be where they've panicked a bit here and been like, well, if they have no confidence of him getting Champions League football this year, then maybe what's the point? Mourinho himself, I don't actually have the figures, but I'm sure he was on a pretty healthy wage himself too.
3 times that of Pioli, I read.
Really?
Who beat him at the weekend.
So, yeah, well, there you go. And I think, actually, I think, you mentioned Pioli. I think Milan are like the perfect example to hold up to Roma here. Like, Milan have not had much money to spend over the years. Years out of the Champions League, really struggled to get back in there. The fiasco that followed Berlusconi selling the club, and then the Elliott Group moving in, and the way that they were able to navigate the transfer market, and eventually get settle on the right manager, and build from the ground up in that sense, was really remarkable. And to be able to secure that Scudetto, to be able to get to a Champions League semi-final on a budget, which I again, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I don't think was any bigger, and may have actually been a bit smaller than what Roma have been working with in the transfer market, at least up until the last 2 seasons. So it is possible in Serie A. Like, there is, there's a lot of mobility in the top half of the Serie A table, and there was an opportunity there for Roma to pounce, and especially with a manager like Mourinho. So yeah, it really does come down to what was in the end, a bit of a wasteful and probably poorly thought through transfer strategy, at least in that first summer. And can you put that all on Mourinho? Like, he'd only just arrived at the club. He doesn't have total control over transfers there. But ultimately, yeah, he has failed in terms of what was put into that team and where they are now.
Yeah, Absolutely. In terms of what happens next, well, as Mikey says at the start of the video, Daniele De Rossi has been appointed Roma full-time manager to the end of the season at least. At least that's when his contract is. They'll renew that. In terms of him, obviously he's a bona fide club legend. He's probably the second most popular player in their recent history after Totti. 600 games for the club, over 100 caps for Italy. You know, was the rock really in that midfield for so many years. But in terms of his managerial career, very green. Very, very green indeed. He's only 40 years old. He's managed 17 games as a manager in charge of Spal in Serie B. He won 3. They ended up getting relegated to the 3rd tier in May last year. He was fired in, I think, April time. It doesn't fill you with confidence. And for De Rossi, you're 40. This job is going to come back around for you. Is this the right time to take it? Especially with these injuries, especially with these players away at AFCON. I don't know. If Roma end up finishing 11th, 12th, I mean, it's pretty tight in mid-table there. Does he just sort of put a black mark against his name for the rest of his career? Probably not, but it's definitely a step back. I mean, look what happened with Pirlo. He's barely been seen since his Juve days. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. For Mourinho, I think international management beckons. It's surely that is well suited to his abilities to come up with one-off tactics for games, one-off games, knockout games, elite mentality in that sort of time where you don't have to work with the players all the time, where you get a break, because he does seem to really grind his own gears throughout the season in a way. Like, he really frustrates himself and gets easily frustrated. So a little less football for Mourinho I think would do really well. And that Portugal job, if Portugal flop at Euro 2024, which I don't expect, I think they're a very good side, but Mourinho stepping in there, there'll be calls for him to replace Southgate as well. I'm not sure whether that's a natural fit.
Really?
Well, at the end of the Euros, there'll definitely be people saying get Mourinho in.
Really?
Mikey doesn't like it.
Nah, I don't like that.
I don't particularly like it either. I think he seems like the antithesis of really Southgate and everything he's built there. But anyway, guys, where do you think Mourinho should go next? How do you think it's going to work under De Rossi? Do you think Mourinho was unfortunate to be fired? Let us know in the comments down below. Let's get into yesterday's big news. Because this is Tuesday vibes, we're not really going to talk about the football that happened at the weekend. There was only 5 games as well. Although that Newcastle Man City game was a delight to watch. And I actually really enjoyed United Spurs for the first 45 minutes.
First half was good. Second half was entirely forgettable. I actually fell asleep. I actually fell asleep in the second half. In fact, I fell asleep at the start of the second half and missed the Bentancur goal away.
Really? That was like a minute in.
I know it was, yeah.
I heard Roy Keane.
You know what? I fell asleep at half time. Yeah. I was a tired boy on Sunday. I was a tired boy. But yeah, sorry, go on. Should we talk about let's talk about the Everton Forest stuff,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're not already clued in at it by now, but yeah, Everton and Nottingham Forest have, of course, been charged with breaching Premier League profitability and sustainability rules, and essentially, well, by May or by the end of May, we will find out whether they've had points deducted.
Has to be done by then.
But doesn't necessarily mean that it will be done by the last day of the season. So that is quite worrying, obviously, for Everton and Forest.
It could be.
Yeah, really big mess. And we were discussing it. Yeah, we were discussing it on Sky earlier. It just puts everyone involved with those clubs under such a huge amount of stress. And I think, we can kind of get into the clubs, because clearly the clubs are at fault. Like, these rules were brought in back in 2015-16 season. Like, they are there to be seen, and ultimately, like, clubs, if you don't abide by them, then like you should expect to face some sort of punishment. But having said that, the timing of this, the fact that it's the fact that for Everton it's the second time they've been charged within the same season, the fact that they're being charged for basically they're being charged for kind of breaking rules during the same amount of time that they were for that 10-point deduction, just give or take one. Well, no, just adding on one season, the 22-23 season, whereas before it was up to the end of 21-22. So essentially, Everton are already have punishment for 75% of the time frame, which is covered in for this new charge. So there's a kind of double jeopardy thing there, which I believe the EFL's regulations kind of guard against something like that happening. So that's clearly a reason for why Everton are so annoyed about this. But yeah, it's just massively unsettling, and it does kind of bring about the question, like, is this really the best way to go about things? Like, surely matters like this can be resolved, or can, punishments can at least be dished out kind of between seasons. Like, these I know the way that these are the kind of timings of clubs having to put in their accounts and everything. I think it's at December for each season, but it just makes me think that the whole system potentially needs to be reformed in some way. And obviously this comes at a time when the independent regulator is being pushed by the UK government. Fans are pretty keen for it as well. Richard Masters, actually the CEO of the Premier League, was speaking to Parliament today about negotiations. He was there with what's his name from the EFL, Rick Parry.
Yeah, Rick Parry.
Who was he was actually talking about the Reading situation as well. But they're currently talking about kind of financial distribution between the Premier League and the EFL, which is has reached a bit of an impasse. But anyway, so I digress. But basically, it all kind of feeds into this. I think from the outside, this image that the Premier League are, haven't dealt with this in the best way, and on the worst side of it, it feeds into conspiracy theories, especially from Everton fans, that this is all just the Premier League trying to save face. In the face of potentially an independent regulator coming in. But sorry, I've rambled for enough there, Dukes. What are your thoughts on this? Like, what?
I think it's double-edged, because I do appreciate the need for these rules to be in place. I think anyone that's followed English football in the last 15, 20 years, there are countless stories of clubs falling into financial issues, administration, collapsing in terms of their whole club. I mean, you covered Bury back in the day. We nearly lost Portsmouth. Bolton have had issues. Numerous clubs. Reading are currently having them. So it is important to be run in a sustainable fashion. At the same time, I do have some sympathy with Everton in particular, given the fact they've already been charged this season, given the fact they are waiting for the review of that. And I kind of agree with you about the between season issue as well, because I think this has the potential to completely sully the rest of the season in terms of the relegation battle, because no one really knows what they need to do. No one knows which games are most important to win. You might end up, stacking your, putting out your best 11s in a certain period, overplaying your best players. They get injured. It might affect it just affects the morality of the competition, really. And I think it could have a pretty huge consequences. And given the fact that a number of clubs that were relegated in the last few years, including Southampton and Leicester, are looking to further punish Everton for supposed, breaches of financial fair play or, these rules, this is going to cause further issues down the lines with whoever does end up being relegated this season. This feels like a case that's just going to run and run and run. There's also obviously the overhanging issue of the fact that City have these 115 charges against them, and that case can't be heard to the end of 2024-25. So how have they managed to? Well, it's because there's so many more charges in that case. But effectively, there's a lot more work to do. But it just feels like, they've been so decisive about this, but haven't managed to speed along that process. What other clubs will potentially be facing issues? And these rules were introduced at a time when and financial fair play in general was introduced at a time when clubs have been allowed to spend whatever they wanted for years, and the elite was established, and it's very difficult to now break into the elite without spending money or without a serious investor. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's funny that these rules came in place just before Farhad Moshiri took over at Everton. And again, it's no excuse, because the rules were in place already, and Moshiri's first 4 years were just huge, absolutely mad, at Everton, and but like you say, regardless of that, the Premier League by that point was an environment in which you had to spend a huge amount. I know Leicester actually coincidentally won it that year, but they served as an absolute, a complete anomaly. And since then, the spending has only got even bigger as the big clubs kind of, vowed to avoid another season like that, in which they all underperformed so much. And especially when you have the, the kind of managerial talent that you have now, when you have the pulling power that you have compared to other European leagues. It's just a bit of a sorry situation. I guess we should get on to Nottingham Forest, because they've only been in the Premier League for 18 months, and they're already facing these charges. I mean,
quite a unique case.
Yeah, I mean, their spending has been.
No offense to Nottingham Forest fans. I respect, you as a club, you as an institution, one of, English football's historically biggest clubs. But it was a unique tactic, and it looks like it's massively backfired.
Potentially,
I mean,
yeah.
they've signed 40 players in the last 3 windows.
Yeah,
I don't really have that much sympathy for an ownership team and a hierarchy that have pursued that strategy. They've actually signed 42.
Yeah.
It just really doesn't make that much sense. And a lot of those players have barely been seen. A lot of those players have now left the club. And it's just been a bit of a mess, to be honest. And I think actually if these deductions do come in, say they both drop 10 points, I worry far, far more for Forest. Having said that, Everton getting 20 points deducted in a season, I think you do really well to stay up as well. Given what that does to morale. But Everton this season, at least underlying numbers-wise, they should be upper mid-table. They're 9th for expected goals, 8th for expected goals against, 7th by expected points. Forest, regularly on those stats at least, deserve to be roughly where they are, just outside the relegation zone. With a 10-point deduction, I think they might well go down as well. Yeah, it's a really sad state for both of these clubs, and I don't, wish their fans any ill, but I can understand the frustrations. I think if you look at the bigger picture, like they've been run pretty badly, or at least pretty uniquely for the last few years, and they've rolled the dice and it hasn't come off. And it does make you think, have there been any other clubs in the Premier League that have rolled the dice and it hasn't really come off? And Chelsea Football Club spring to mind. It'll be interesting to see what happens a few years down the line with these rules. If they're this tight on Everton initially breaking it by £19 million, and that was a 10-point deduction, let's see what happens with Chelsea. I know they think they're sort of accounting geniuses that have reinvented football, but surely there's going to be some explaining to do at least.
Or a few more Mason Mounts out the door.
Well, exactly.
A few more Conor Gallaghers.
But how many more Conor Gallaghers and Reece Jameses do you have?
Yeah,
there's only a couple more to sell.
That's the problem.
Yeah, it's going to be absolutely fascinating what happens. I mean, McCubs, are you in agreement with me that you particularly worry for Forest? But I mean, both these sides with a 10-point deduction, we're speculating.
Yeah, well, we are speculating. We don't know what the deduction is going to be, and Everton haven't even had their appeal. They don't even know the results. Of their appeal for that initial 10-point deduction. They don't know whether that's going to be rescinded or not. If it is rescinded, it will be probably as a result of the mitigating factors that Everton have cited. The external factors that have contributed to them posting those losses, probably none more so than Usmanov's investment drying up in the club. If that gets thrown out, then Everton will probably be able to throw out this one as well. So Everton could, actually end up mid-table potentially, if that's the case. With Forest, I mean, I know they've, they very recently hired, I can't remember, Nick DeMarco to fight their case. He's like a King's Counsel, creme de la creme sports lawyer. So they have got the best, one of the best in the biz fighting their case. They're expecting supposedly to learn their fate in April, but like I said, this could drag on. And so I think you do worry about Forest a little bit more, just because they're a much less established modern club in the 21st century, and they are still under the ownership that created these problems as well. Since Marinakis came in the 7 years that he's been at the helm, 170 different players have come into the club, whether that be on permanents or loans. Like that level of turnover, it's actually a bit of a minor miracle. It's actually a bit of a minor miracle that they even made it to the Premier League, if I'm honest. Like that kind of level of turnover over that short amount of time. Spent 300 or the equivalent at least of 317 million euros since promotion in 2022. In less than 2 years, 242 million euro net spend. It is pretty outrageous stuff. It's not overly surprising in that sense. I would certainly worry for Forest more. I think Forest probably have less of a, again, kind of speculating, but just from the kind of the numbers that we know about, and the fact that Everton have at least curbed their spending a bit more in the last 2-3 years, I worry for Forest a bit more. I feel like they may have a bit less of a case. And then also they are, as a team, not in as good a place either. Having said that, of course, if Everton get another 10-point deduction, they're bottom of the league as things stand. So, I would worry for Forest a bit more. I think Everton at least do have a manager in Sean Dyche, who I would back to stay with them if they were to get relegated, knows how to navigate the Championship well, and is also, great at keeping teams up as well. Like, there is just a more solid foundation there. Whereas with Forest, there are just a lot more unknowns. They recently got rid of Steve Cooper, who was massively popular at the City ground, and did perform a miracle to get them into the Premier League and keep them there. So yeah, I'd definitely worry more about Forest. I don't know, what you think.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's a lot more. I do feel a little bit sorry for Nuno Espirito Santo, to be totally honest. Like, he was replaced, as you say, a really popular manager. He needed this job to work well. He did that really short spell at Spurs where he sort of struggled to get across his thoughts and authority, really. Then went to Saudi Arabia. That didn't work out. Good opportunity to come back to the Premier League, beat Man United and Newcastle in his opening games or so. And then he's faced with this already. It's just a complete mess. But guys, let us know your thoughts about this situation and Mourinho being fired by Roma. Please let us know all your thoughts in the comments down below. We're still ruminating ours, we're still trying to dissect this news because it is pretty momentous, and there's a lot of information, but there's no clarity at the moment. So it's a lot of speculation. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed Tuesday Vibes, the first and probably only ever Tuesday Vibes.
I think there actually has been a Tuesday Vibes before,
Really?
I think there might have been
maybe
one
on a bank holiday
weekend. Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Drinks.
Well, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you later. Bye-bye.